Alrighty, y'all. Welcome back to the show. We're looking at Euro-Spec cars versus American-Spec cars. What is safer? What is better? We're going to find that out in this video. It's kind of an interesting concept if you actually think about it. This is from a channel called Curleem. Very good channel. I highly encourage you to check him out. So be linked in the description down below so you can do that. And, of course, watch this whole video uninterrupted. And this has been suggested to me multiple times, although I have recently Ahsoka on Discord suggesting this for the channel. So I really do appreciate that. Let's just jump straight into this. I think this should be interesting.
North American spec cars and European spec cars. There's a lot of differences between
Hey, Panther platform. That's a Mercury Grand Marquis, one of my favorite cars of all time. I have a police version of this, Ford Crown Victoria P71 Police Interceptor. These are amazing cars. I'm glad to represent in the U.S.
American spec vehicles and European spec vehicles. And I don't mean just the size or the types of vehicles offered, but actually the legal and regulatory differences between North American spec cars and European spec cars. It's something that the average consumer probably doesn't know, but car enthusiasts know about these differences, and we often refer to EU spec or rest of world spec versus North American spec. Today I want to cover the differences between...
Yeah, in the car world, you hear of EU spec, you hear of like JDM, Japanese spec, and then, of course, USDM or Canadian spec, right?
Between North American spec vehicles and European spec vehicles, and why I believe European spec vehicles are actually safer than North American spec vehicles because of these differences. So let's jump into it. So before moving to the Netherlands, I was used to North American spec vehicles and the look of North American spec vehicles. Things like amber parking lights, side markers, red turn signals. But actually, after living in the Netherlands and spending more time with European spec vehicles, I realized European specs are actually safer and actually better looking. You don't have the amber parking signal. You don't have...
Okay, so this is on the US spec one for sure, right? We have these amber, sometimes they have these amber like signals / reflectors even, whether it's integrated into the headlight housing, it could be on the wheel well or fender somewhere. This is, of course, a lot of this video is going to come down to personal preference. Obviously, he doesn't like these, which I understand. It's not like the perfectly clean look because that orange interrupts, all this clean white going on here. But the way BMW integrates this is very thin, right? I don't really think it detracts the look of the car. I mean, when you look at the car as a whole, you're not really going to notice that, right? Unless you're really looking for it.
Amber turn signals in the rear. There's a lot of these differences I'm going to jump into. Europe has a different spec, and it's also in line with a lot of other countries that's outside of Europe, and those are the main differences that I'm going to compare today. All right, the first thing is the one that I'm the most passionate about, and that's red turn signals versus amber turn signals.
Yes.
The rest of the world has amber turn signals like this. It is safer.
True.
It is easier to distinguish between the brake lights and the turn signal. The rest of the world does this. In North America, red turn signals are allowed. And
yeah, now that doesn't mean all of them have red. There's quite a few cars. I'm actually gonna make this kind of like I'm gonna make this like an interactive reaction here. So we're gonna take what he says and shows here, and then I'll also throw in some examples I have of some of our cars that we have. And some of them, off the top of my head, I already know some of them. Of course, like my Crown Victoria being the exact sister car to this Grand Marquis, of course, is all red. Whereas some of our vehicles are obviously US spec and have red brake lights, but then they have amber turn signals. So it just depends. Difference being the amber turn signals is mandated in the EU, whereas in North America, it's not. You don't have to have amber turn signals. But I will go with him and say the amber turn signals make more sense. I think they do make more sense. I think it looks better seeing the orange light and knowing that that's different than the red light that should be only the brake light.
Not just red turn signals, but actually the same light fixture that's used as the brake sometimes is used as the turn signal.
True.
In some cars, it's a separate bulb from the brake light, but they're still red. In this case, in the Mercury Grand Marquis, as you can see, it's the brake light that's flashing to be the turn signal.
Yep.
This has always driven me nuts, even when I lived back in the States, because it's hard to distinguish when a car is braking versus turning. You have to pay a little bit more attention because it's hard to distinguish, is the red light turning on because it's the brakes? Is it turning on because it's the turn signal? Sometimes bulbs are out and it's hard to tell. So I've always been passionate about this. This is how it should be. This is how the rest of the world is, and this is how it should be.
All right, and I'm going to jump over into the screenshots of my car here. So as you can see, our Subaru has a orange turn signal and red brake light rather. So it has the sort of EU style, right, with both colors. Same with our older 05 GMC Yukon XL. Amber turn signal, white reverse lights, red brake lights. Now come to the front, there's that orange He was talking about the side markers. It's integrated, kind of darkened into the Subaru and integrated into the headlight housing in the GMC as well. So I like those a little bit better. They are a little bit cleaner than the separate look. It is integrated in the headlight housing in that Saturn, but that Saturn has red brake lights and red turn signals, as well as this police interceptor. So it's kind of weird. They used to have the orange down there, and they got rid of it in later model years. I don't know why.
But this is allowed in North America, and it's actually quite common. And I've even heard from American car people that they prefer the look of the red turn signal.
Wow. Yeah, see, of course, this would come down to personal preference. I'm sure there is people that prefer that. I do think that's pretty odd.
So the Mercury Grand Marquis, even though it's here in the Netherlands, actually has red turn signals. The Netherlands is one of the few countries in the world that does allow red turn signals.
Oh,
there are some European countries and other countries that do allow it. So it's one of the things I didn't have to adapt when I brought the car over here. But objectively, I believe the amber turn signal is much better. Let me know what you think.
Really cool of this guy, by the way. Shout out to Curly. I mean, how cool is it that he embraces the EU? He's embracing the Netherlands by living there, and he's educated on EU versus US spec and stuff. I think that's really cool. But I also think it's cool that he brought a slice of the USA. I mean, a big body-on-frame V8 rear-wheel drive Grand Marquis. I think that's awesome that he's driving that in the streets of the Netherlands. I mean, how cool is that?
Big difference that I want to cover is amber parking lights, or side markers as they're also called. It's a bit hard to see here because in the Mercury they changed out the bulb, but in North America most cars have an amber side marker parking light that is required as part of the headlight system.
Yeah, and like I said, I'll show clips of our cars. So you'll see some of them have the orange in there, that you can see the bulb, and then of course you'll see this part, this orange reflector. That's not illuminated, but it's super reflective, so it appears visible at all times, whether the car's on or off. And I'm not seeing that on this BMW, which is of course EU spec. So that's pretty interesting. Now, like he said, this BMW has a super clean, sleek look to it. Because there's no random colors going on, right? It's very sleek and muted.
BMW, the parking lights don't require that. And if you look at a US spec BMW 3 Series, there's a big amber side marker light here, which I think is quite ugly. It's a look that I was used to back when I lived in the States, but actually after living abroad, I realized this is a much cleaner look. Mm-hmm. And actually, what value does that amber side marker light add? I don't think it's necessary. Much cleaner look. Here on the Mercury, they converted the light to white, but it was an amber parking light, the same here. But yeah, it's just a difference that I don't think is necessary.
I'll agree with him and say that light is pretty weird on the US spec BMW being on the wheel well like that's kind of weird. I don't mind at all when they're integrated into the headlight housing. So like in the Mercury here, that amber light that's on the wheel well of the BMW is rather in the headlight housing. I think that's fine. I don't think it interrupts the look at all. You can still have a clean looking car, and just the headlight housings has amber and clear and whatever. I think it works in that way.
And I think the European spec looks a lot better than North American spec. The next big difference is side turn signal indicators. So the EU and pretty much the rest of the world require side turn signal indicators. Most of the time they're integrated in the mirror like this now, but back in the day they used to be side mounted on the fender like you see on the Mercury here.
Right.
North America doesn't require this, and to me this is a key safety feature because when you're driving alongside a car and you want to know if that car is going to be moving into your lane, you can't see the front and rear turn signals if they're signaling their lane change. Side marker indicators are key, and really key is safety feature. Nowadays, most new cars in the US do have side marker indicators on the mirrors because it's kind of seen as a luxury feature, and I think it's something that the European brands kind of influence in the North American market. And actually, if you look at something like a Toyota Corolla or a Hyundai in the US, by default, they don't have the side marker turn signals, but higher end trims do because it's kind of seen as a luxury feature because of the European brand influence in North America.
Yeah, and of course, out of my vehicles, let's see, 2 of them have the side marker indicators on the mirror, and then I believe the rest of mine, which is multiple vehicles, do not. So it just depends on the U.S. ones.
But I do think this is a really key safety feature that should be required on all vehicles around the world, and it surprises me that in North America it's not a safety requirement, it's not a required feature at all.
That is surprising.
Next thing I want to cover is rear fog lights. So in the EU and most other markets around the world,
these are weird.
Rear fog lights are a required feature or are just featured on cars.
Yeah, he's right. These are required in most of the world, although in the US you just don't see these barely at all, like almost ever.
And they're usually on the driver's side or the center point of the vehicle. In this case on the 3 Series, it's just on the driver's side. Personally, I would prefer if it was on both sides. But this helps with rearward visibility in poor conditions such as fog or heavy rain. And this is a really key safety feature that I wish was available or actually required in the United States and Canada. And actually on European brand cars in the US and Canada, they do offer the feature. They actually just ship it there anyway. It's not required, but they leave the configuration as is, and they have the rear fog lights. And the funny thing that I see is people don't know how to use rear fog lights in the US and Canada. The next difference I want to cover is something that I notice each time that I'm switching between this vehicle and the BMW is the side mirrors. And this was something I didn't even really know about before living here. So in North America, the side mirrors on cars are a little bit different. The driver's side is pretty flat, and the passenger side is a bit more convex, but then it has this text in it that you see objects in mirror are closer than they appear. So you have different focal lengths for each of the mirrors. On the passenger side, it helps with the blind spot and side visibility, but on the driver's side, it's quite flat, and you have a pretty big blind spot. On the EU-Spec mirrors, both are convex, and there's even a part that acts like a blind spot mirror.
That's cool.
So it's objectively safer because you have a wider field of view,
you can
have
see
a
it on
smaller
edge.
blind spot. The problem is the image is wider, and the vehicles are a little bit smaller, which affects your perception of the size. And so in North America, they only allow that on the passenger side, which to me, it's a safety thing. If you allow it on both sides of the car, you have better field of view, smaller blind spot, and it's objectively safe. Next difference is license plates. And
That's
you can
a good
see
one. I have no kind of input or really argument there. Surprised we don't have that on the driver's side. I wonder what the reasoning would be.
American and Canadian style license plates are a lot smaller. In some cars, they look okay. Like this Grand Marquis was obviously designed for the smaller license plate. But in some other cars, this small format doesn't look very good. It doesn't complement the design of cars very well. And in my opinion, actually, the American and Canadian size license plate is a little bit less safe because the characters are smaller. You can see over here, if I were to take a Florida license plate and put it on a BMW 3 Series, which is probably the first time this has been done, you can see how small it is in comparison to the Dutch license plate. The letters are a lot smaller. It's harder to see from further back. And actually, I think the Dutch license plate and the kind of European style wide license plate complements the look of the car a little bit better.
Yeah, this is a matter of opinion as well. I don't mind the EU plates. I think they're actually kind of neat just because it's different than what I'm used to. I will say functionality, the EU plates win 100% because look at how big and clear the numbers and letters are. You have a solid background, solid letters. I mean, you can't beat it. It's truly functional. It is also cool, the shape, how it's like a long rectangle. It's totally different than ours. Now, I will say the U.S. Plates, when it comes to design, like, for example, the Florida plate here, I think design as in, I don't know, like fun factor and graphic design, the U.S. plates hands down win. Nowhere else really on Earth compares, in my opinion. And I think that's hard to argue. So I think they're a little less functional because certain plates, when they are really busy and have a lot going on, the numbers can actually be kind of hard to read. So function definitely is a bit lower. But as in purely aesthetics, they look better. So if that makes sense, function is less, but aesthetics are better, and that's an easy one. You have plain plates throughout most of the world versus the U.S. has all these decorated plates with each state having their own flair and their own colors, and it's really cool. Of course, like the Florida one, you have white with the state outline, the dark green letters and numbers, and of course the oranges there because, the citrus sunshine state, right? So, for fun factor, this is a lot more cool.
It's the look of the car a little bit better, especially in the front. So I think it's safer and it just looks better to have the European.
I will say in the front's a different story. In the front, this shape plate looks much better. I actually hate front plates, period. So certain states I've lived in don't require front plate, and I love that. It's so much better. The car just looks how it should look. And some states in the U.S. do require front plate, and our shape of our plate works on the back, but it does not work on the front. It looks super goofy and dominates the look of the car in front, and it kind of ruins it. Whereas this plate is sleek. It barely takes up any room because it's so short, and even though it's wide, the front of the car is, of course, super wide, so it really doesn't dominate the look as much. It kind of blends in better.
Style license plates. Now this varies a lot. Different countries have different regulations about license plate sizes. I'm not going to go into all of those details, but let me know what you prefer. Do you prefer the European style license plates or do you prefer the American style license plate?
That's a good one. Yeah, tell me in the comments what you prefer. Like I said, I love the U.S. plates and I think they're awesome. I like that they're really decorated and unique to each state. But of course, if we're talking pure functionality, then yeah, we got to hand it to the EU. That was a really good one. Always good stuff from this channel. I skipped around a little bit, so if you would like to watch the whole thing, use that link down there and definitely browse his channel. This is a good one. Remember, these EU versus America matchups are always interesting. And this one was really, really good because a lot of people would just think cars are cars, but that's not the story. Depending on where you're at, cars can be a lot different, and there's different regulations and so forth. I will mention a further thing is I used to work in the auto industry. I used to work in an assembly plant in various different positions there, and one of them when I was on assembly, I will say we made Jeeps that went around the world. They went to Asia, they went to Europe, they went to Australia, they went to Mexico, they went to the U.S., Canada, they went everywhere. And I will say for the U.S. and Canadian spec, some little interesting info is the Jeeps would have a bigger, like, extra bumper insert and support behind the fascia, and they would have more airbags. Whereas the, some European and Asian market ones would have less kind of going on behind the fascias, right? So less sort of bumper structure, and they would have slightly less number of airbags inside them. So that's something to note. The American ones have usually more airbags, at least from what I've seen. But that's one example with one car company, so take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I would love to hear from you down in the comments. Any other differences or something along these lines that you found interesting that you'd like to point out, please tell us down there. Throw a like on there if you enjoyed this. Subscribe to be part of this amazing community we do have here. Lots of fun videos coming this weekend. We have mail time and, of course, some more Euro Truck Simulator and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that. My name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker, and until next time, y'all, I'll catch you later.